So students, I want to provide a visual representation for you that explains sort of the physical access, the devices, the network that you're going to use within this course, okay? And basically how it all works. So I'm going to start with what I have to do each term so that you all can gain access to your own or a shared Raspberry Pi. Now, I only have 20 Raspberry Pis, as you can see here in the upper left-hand corner. So if I have more than 20 students, some of you will be sharing a Raspberry Pi, and you'll need to work with within your, the two of you, because there'll never be more than 2 students, on who will access and have access to the Raspberry Pi when. And I will assign you through random draw to a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so basically in our COCC data center, I've created what I call the Pi board. It's got these 20 Raspberry Pi 5s. Now, what the heck is a Raspberry Pi 5? A Raspberry Pi 5 is a single board computer, looks like this, okay? And it's the size of about a 3/4 of a dollar bill, to give you an idea, okay? Now, this is a 64-bit quad-core ARM Cortex-A76 processor that runs at 2.4 gigahertz, okay? Quad-core, 2.4 gigahertz, which means 2.4 billion processes per second, okay? Now, we have 8 gigabyte versions of these, and as you can see, these are really powerful, great machines that cost only about $100 with a case and a charger, etc. Power supply, I should say. So notice video, it can support up to 2 4K P60 HDMI, so you could literally run 2 4K monitors on this thing. You're going to access them remotely. Again, we have the 8 gig. It's got dual band 802.11ac Wi-Fi. It's got Bluetooth 5. It's got all these great ports. So I'll leave this up. You can always pause this video if you'd like, okay? So some additional information, list price is $80. You add a case, you add a power supply, and you're about $100, which is not much at all. And these, by the way, are sort of the de facto home lab hacking devices because they run an operating system that you're going to get to know called Kali Linux. So what happens beforehand is I have to go up each term and I want to make sure all of these are updated. So I have to sit down, they're not in there, you can't see them in there. Let me find a picture with them in there. So here's a good picture. The storage for these is a little micro SD card, and I've attached this little tab. It makes it easier for me to get them out. And then they're also numbered to match the Raspberry Pi host name, okay, that I provide to the Pis. So that's what you see here. Here's the back, the back of it, so you can see here's an individual Raspberry Pi. And so what I do is I sit down with my computer in the data center, and I have to install 2 operating systems. The first one I install is called Raspberry Pi OS, the 64-bit version. And the reason I have to install that is to update the firmware on the Raspberry Pis. So I make sure we have the latest firmware. Now, what took so long for the summer term, if you're not in summer term, this doesn't apply, is I had a little issue when I installed Kali Linux and I had to go back and do this again. So that's why these aren't ready. But anyway, hopefully they're ready for your class, whatever term you're in. So I go ahead and I write the Raspberry Pi OS using what's called the Raspberry Pi Imager and my personal computer to all of the cards. I install all of the cards, and then I remote in via an SSH shell, and I run a bunch of commands, and that's what I need to automate, right? Because I'm doing this 20 times on each Pi. I have to update the operating system. I then have to upgrade the operating system, so I get all the packages and updates. Then I have to actually install them. Then I go in and manually update the firmware and some other things. And then at that point, what I do is I pull the cards back out, and then I install the Kali Linux operating system, okay? Now, in a future lab, we'll talk about how you could create a virtual machine that does this same thing, but I want to give you the opportunity to work on these Raspberry Pis. So then I install the Kali Linux operating system. I put the cards back in. I update the Kali Linux operating system. I update the, I then install the updates, and then I install what's called XRDP, which is a remote desktop server so that you can remote in graphically as well as remote in from the shell. And what you'll find is that remoting in from the shell is always going to be faster because all that's going over is your commands, a few bits, right? And sometimes just bytes, versus accessing it through a remote desktop. So I actually have the shell active here and all clear here, right? And then I'll just run an ls command so you can see, right, that I'm in my user folder called a directory in Linux, right? And so here's my home folder and what's in my home folder currently, okay? Now, when you access it, and you'll do this via the lab, when you access it, you will do it both through the SSH terminal so that you understand that, and through the RDP. And you can see that the remote desktop with the graphical user interface is slow. So you just have to type in a command and be patient. I've got a command that I'm going to run here. So I'll go ahead and run this command, and what it's going to do, I got to put in my password, is it's going to update the size of all of it's called high HDMI, and you know, so you can see that here, or DPI, I think it is high DPI mode, because as you can see, this is really small, right? So it can be difficult to see. So once that command runs, well, I have a larger screen as I remote in. Now, let me remind you, the performance of the remote desktop is not that great. We'll try to do as much as we can, so follow instructions carefully. We'll do as much as we can via the SSH terminal, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, how you're going to access all of this is first part of the lab that you're going to complete. You're going to come into either your Windows or Mac operating system, okay? And you're going to install a VPN client to the base operating system, okay? You'll notice I have it on here. I named mine COCC Pioneer_VPN, and I connect to that. You can see that I'm connected to it now. Once I'm connected to it, I have access to the entire network at COCC, all right? So that's what's going on. Let me just remind you all, folks, stick with the labs. If you want to do anything extra, you need to ask me first. Do not be running commands, hacking commands, getting into other students' Raspberry Pis, etc. I have logging turned on the firewall. If I see you do that, we're going to have a conversation one time, and then I'm going to ask you to be removed from the class. So really important that you do this work, that you act as an ethical hacker, and that you get approval and follow that white hat agreement. Let me know if you have any questions, folks. Have a great day.